Does more volume equal more gains? Today, we're going to take a look at a paper that is looking how non-responders versus responders respond to different varying amounts of volume, and then talk a little bit about how that could translate into our athlete process or our coaching process, and potentially how this could change how we progress programs over time, potentially maybe how we set up programs initially for certain clients, and start to kind of look at some of the outcomes that we would one, see from this paper, but two, anecdotally take into what we're doing in the gym. So when we look at the overview of this paper, the title is The Impact of Resistance Training Volume on Hypertrophy, Responders versus Non-Responders. And essentially the goal of this is to see how does responders to training versus non-responders to training adapt to resistance training from a low volume perspective and then progress into a high volume perspective. Now, the interesting part about this paper is that it is a within subject design of 85 older adults, and that average age is like 68 plus or minus 4 years. So when we're starting to look at this, like from a collective group perspective, maybe not fully applying to your age range, but we can still take some of this information and have it be suggestive of how we could potentially test some things for your program design. You're going to have one leg trained with one set and the other leg trained with 4 sets of knee extensions in that 8 to 15 reps range. And we're going to be doing that 2 times per week for 10 weeks. So again, within subject design, one leg's going to be in the low volume group, one leg's going to be in the high volume group. And we're going to be measuring the cross-sectional area via MRI of the quadriceps, and then the strength of unilateral knee extension because we're training the knee extension. And so when we look at the classification of this, responders to training volume would be seeing a 3.27% increase in cross-sectional area, and then non-responders being sub 3.27% increase. So when we look at the results here, we did see a pretty big change in regards to 4 sets versus 1 set in the hypertrophy, suggesting a little bit of a dose response. Now, we did see hypertrophy with both protocols, the trend being slightly better for the 4 sets group, and strength progressing regardless of volume. So what this may start to kind of suggest is when we look at higher resistance training volumes, we can mitigate some unresponsiveness to volumes and improving outcomes by just training at higher total volumes. And then potentially even seeing that we see enhanced hypertrophy outcomes for people that even do respond to the training volume if we do kind of push that metric up. Now, some considerations here, obviously, like training twice per week at 4 sets per session versus 1 set per session, like those volume metrics aren't very high from the forefront in training knee extension. So we do have to take that into consideration as far as like the total volume performed here as like a little bit of a grain of salt. But potentially still seeing this dose response. So if we look at this from a program design consideration, I do think there's some aspects you can take for learning yourself or learning your clients if you're a coach, and how this affects program design. So for unresponsive athletes, I do think this is where we shouldn't be afraid of higher volumes for unresponsive body parts. Now, this is with the caveat that the quality of the stimulus is ensured. So you've gone through the process of assessing movement quality, matching the movements that you have in the program design to that movement quality, ensuring that execution is at a high standard so that all of the tension or the majority of the tension is going towards these target body parts, but not being afraid to push that volume metric up so that we can see that progress in the physique. Understanding that this is an individual thing. So people will have an individual response to volume dosing. And so we need to understand someone's ability to recover, understand that there's outside life metrics that affect that ability to recover, and then dose volume according to need based on where someone lives on that spectrum. I've had some people respond to 4 days per week training, extremely low volume, better than other people with extremely high volume. So this is going to be needed to take with a N=1 application, and understanding that this may vary person to person. But in generality, we are typically going to see a dose response relative to someone's ability to recover. Now, with higher volumes, it may limit some strength outcomes. Now, we're not training for strength, we're training for hypertrophy. However, we do still need to see progressive overload over the long term. So when we start to zoom out over a 1 month, 2 month, 3 month period, we should see the weight trends trending up and the ability to drive stimulus trending up for the progressive stimulus of driving hypertrophy. and that trend should happen over time. If it's not happening, we need to be looking into why that's not happening, because not progressing your ability to provide a stimulus is not going to allow you to maximize your ability to progress your physique when mechanical tension is a primary driver of hypertrophy. Now, I did put an order of importance in here for you to understand like how important it is to check the boxes before you go into volume progression. And the order of importance here being first, execution, making sure that execution is on par for all the movements within that body part. Accurate movement selection, so regressing or progressing patterns as someone's skills progress or regress relative to injury profiles or their ability to perform movements. And then also sequencing according to capabilities. So this could also be sequencing according to priority. So this would be your ability to resist force if this has previous injury profiles, potentially someone with previous knee injuries or a knee injury doing something like pre-exhaust before they go into squatting so that they stay safe in squatting. This could also be something like putting the quad volume in the front of the session and the hamstring volume in the back portion of the session if quads have much more need than the hamstrings or vice versa. And then we're going to get into the training intensity. And this is like the last piece of the quality that we need to kind of understand before we go into volume progressions. And training intensity in this conversation is going to be relative to how hard we train to failure, and having that close proximity to failure for all of these patterns, whether it be not safe to train all the way to failure and having 1 rep in reserve for like big squat compounds, or for the isolation patterns training to that failure point so that we get all of the effective reps per set that we could need. And that being kind of the underlying foundation before you step into increasing frequency and volume. Because once these tenets are met, we do need to explore the escalation of volume to see what this person can handle, find that break point, and then start to come back into that productive place so that you know where to take someone to maximize the amount of stimulus they can recover from, but also not take them too far where they're constantly needing the deload every 4 or 5 weeks. So it is a little bit of a teeter-totter space. It is a little bit of a gray area if you want to think of it that way, of like where that cross line is. But you do need to explore pushing it, not being afraid to go a little bit too far and then pulling it back, so that you kind of know where that limit is for you. So I did put a program example here of a client that needs a lot of hamstring work. So you'll see in this, all of the leg sessions are after a rest day. This is prioritizing the quality of the work. Every single leg session will have hamstring work at the start of it. So even the compound leg day that has some quad compound work, we'll start the session with hamstring isolation work, so that you have the leg glutes hams day that has a lot of hamstring glute work, the compound leg day, which has a mixture of both, and then the hams and arms being solely hamstring work into a little bit of arm work to hit the total volume metrics for the week. So again, this session setup or this program setup currently has 24 sets of hamstrings across the rotation. When we get to the end of the block, this will probably end up having 28, 29, because at 24 sets, he's moving and grooving really well. He's able to continue that training for a long period of time. So we'll probably take a deload pretty soon and then push that volume metric up and start to test higher volumes. So this is kind of what this looks like when you start to have someone who's a little bit volume resistant and you need to get someone up to that level. We started this block with a full reset of execution on all hamstring patterns, a lower volume set, and we've been progressing up to this 24 sets per rotation. So in summary, like still, again, you're going to hear me say this ad nauseum, program around class needs relative to the athlete's needs to match those class needs and their movement capabilities to provide stimulus to the body parts that need it the most. We do need to progress volume up, but we need to make sure that the quality of the stimulus has been established before we go into volume progressions. This is going to keep your athletes out of injury profiles, and this is going to make them more productive on a week-to-week basis. And then don't be afraid to push the boundaries. Like, it's okay to push your volume too high, learn from it, and then come back. Just be aware and start tracking all of the subjective metric skewing that'll happen when it's time to deload. We go over how to go through understanding that you need to deload in the level 1 course. We build all of that out and kind of that progression of questions to ask. So make sure you guys check that out. But just again, don't be afraid to push volume up within your recovery capacity limits, and make sure that that quality is there so that when you push that up, you actually see the progress in your physique that you're looking for.